All right, let's jump right into this. Welcome, everyone. So, today we're putting on our detective hats to investigate a truly fascinating corner of the English language. I mean, have you ever wondered why we say, I love this song, but I'm loving this vacation? Or why I promise works perfectly, but saying I am promising sounds completely unnatural? Well, in this explainer, we're going to crack the code on state verbs and performatives. We're basically taking abstract grammar rules and turning them into practical, usable tools so you can communicate with absolute precision. So let's kick off our investigation with our master clue board. We're going to take this exact source material, these four distinct rules labeled A through D, and break them down from pure theory into deep, actionable practice. We aren't just going to memorize these concepts, we're going to actually see them in action, dissecting exactly how native speakers unconsciously apply them every single day. Here's our roadmap for solving today's mysteries. First, the state spectrum. Second, inside the mental state. Third, the performative promise. Fourth, case 1.1, the verb pairs. And finally, case 1.2, Aunt Mara's email. Section 1, the state spectrum, when verbs freeze in kind. To really wrap our heads around the state spectrum, we have to recognize that verbs, well, they have different personalities. Some verbs describe active, moving situations, while others act almost like a photograph. They freeze a state of being in time. Now, what's really fascinating here is how the exact same word can literally change its rules based entirely on its context. Take the verb appear. When it means taking part in something, like a physical action, we can absolutely use the continuous form. You'd say, Carly Robb is currently appearing in a musical. She's actively doing it right now. But when appear just means seems, which is a state of being, time freezes. We have to use the simple form. So the app doesn't appear to work. You never say the app isn't appearing to work, right? The underlying meaning completely dictates the grammar. Now, within this spectrum, we've got a specific group I like to call the rarely continuous suspects. According to our rule A, verbs like believe, consist of, doubt, and own are, frankly, highly inflexible. Because they describe fundamental, unchangeable states of being or possession, they almost never take that ing continuous form in standard English. Think about the logic for a second. You own a car. You aren't actively owning a car in a way you can just pause and restart. You doubt something. You aren't doubting it as an active hobby, right? Keep these inflexible suspects in the back of your mind. They're going to be absolutely crucial for solving our case files later on. Section 2. Inside the mental state. Thinking, feeling, and realizing. Let's take a closer look at Rule C, which basically takes us inside the human mind. Verbs that describe our thoughts, our preferences, and our feelings, they have their own special set of behaviors that we need to decode. Now, a lot of mental state verbs like know or believe stubbornly stick to the simple present. But then we have the verb consider. When consider means to think carefully about something, it becomes beautifully adaptable. It actually loves the continuous form. If you're actively pondering a decision, you don't say he considers taking early retirement. No, you say he is considering taking early retirement. It's an active mental process happening right there in real time. Section 3, the performative promise, doing by saying. This brings us to just a fascinating linguistic concept. These are magical verbs, where the act of speaking is literally the action itself. You're doing something simply by uttering the word. When you say, I promise, the very act of speaking that sentence physically creates the promise in the real world. You don't say, I am promising to help you. You just declare, I promise. The rule here is incredibly straightforward and efficient. For affirmative performative verbs, we keep it simple and direct. We use the present simple. No continuous ing forms are needed to get the job done here. All right, we've successfully gathered our theoretical clues from rules A, B, C, and D. So it's time to pivot to the second half of our explainer. I invite you to open the case files with me. We're going to put these theories to the test, moving from abstract knowledge into deep, focused practice to solve these grammatical puzzles together. Section 4. Case 1.1. The verb pairs. Spot the difference. We're going to meticulously break down every single sentence pair here, checking back with our rules to figure out exactly why one sentence demands a continuous verb and the other requires a simple one. Let's look at question 2. Speaker A asks, what are you doing with that ruler? The reply describes an active physical action happening right at this exact moment. So, naturally, we apply the continuous. I'm measuring the area of the kitchen. But in part B, we're talking about the physical dimensions of a garden. The garden isn't actively doing anything. Its dimensions are a permanent state. So calling back to our state verbs rule, we use the simple present. The garden measures 12 by 20 meters. Next up, we're grouping questions 3 and 8 together because they actually share a structural secret. Do you remember our rarely continuous suspects from Rule A? Well, doubt and consist of are squarely on that list. Because they describe inflexible states, we handle them exactly the same way. For 3A, I doubt whether I'll get another chance, and 3B, but I doubt it, both take the simple present. And the logic holds perfectly for question 8 too. The roof consists of only plastic sheets, and their school uniform consists of black trousers. Whether we're talking about the structural integrity of a roof or the mandated clothing of a uniform, consist of describes a fundamental state. It's simple present all the way down. So, the really crucial point here is understanding when a situation is temporary versus when it's permanent. Let's examine question 4. The New Science Museum is currently drawing a massive crowd. Because it's a temporary boom, we say it is attracting 10,000 visitors. But flowers generally drawing bees? That's a permanent, ongoing fact of nature. So we simply say flowers attract bees. We see the exact same contrast in question 5. Carlos permanently hates heights, so he doesn't like them. But the speaker in 5B is describing their current and possibly changing feelings about a brand new job. At the moment, I'm not liking it at all. Rule A specifically allows state verbs to utilize the continuous form if the speaker wants to emphasize that a situation is temporary. Now let's contrast active events against permanent states in questions 6 and 10. In 6A, mechanics are physically and actively doing work on a car. They are fitting new brakes. But in 6B, a jumper's size relative to a person, that's a permanent state. It doesn't fit her. Using the continuous there would make zero sense. Similarly, in question 10A, Polson is undergoing an active, ongoing medical procedure. He is having treatment. But in 10B, a sister possessing long blonde hair is a permanent state of ownership and appearance. Therefore, we absolutely go with the simple present. My sister has long blonde hair. To wrap up exercise 1.1, let's analyze questions 7 and 9. In 7A, the texture of a shirt is an unchanging attribute. It feels like silk. But human health? That is highly temporary. In 7B, I'm not feeling very well perfectly captures a temporary bout of illness. Now, question 9 is just a fantastic example. Simon's new song sounds quite good, and what's that noise? It sounds like a bird. In both of these instances, we're describing states of perception. The noise isn't actively performing an action, it just possesses a certain quality to our ears. So both parts of question 9 rely entirely on the reliable simple present. Sounds. Section 5, Case 1.2. Aunt Mara's email. Real-time grammar rescue. Great detective work so far. Now we have an email here from Martina to her Aunt Mara, and she is in desperate need of a real-time grammar rescue. We're going to go through this letter gap by gap and apply our rules to find the most natural, accurate phrasing. Let's look at gaps 1 and 2. Martina writes about apologizing and admitting. Let's explicitly call back to Rule D, the performative promise. Saying the word is doing the action. Because these are affirmative statements, we strictly stick to the simple present, so we can confidently cross out the continuous forms. She should absolutely write, I apologize and I admit. But look closely at gap 3. Martina writes, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that I'm not enjoying it. Now here, we must address Rule D's fascinating little linguistic loophole. While affirmative performatives demand the simple present, negative performatives are incredibly flexible. Both I don't suggest and I'm not suggesting carry a remarkably similar meaning in native speech. So in this rare instance, neither option gets crossed out. Both work perfectly well depending on the speaker's subtle preference. Moving on to gap 4, Martina is talking about a developing awareness regarding her job. According to Rule C, when we want to emphasize that a mental state is recently developing or changing over time, we use the continuous. So we're going to cross out the simple form and boldly choose I'm now realizing how hard the job is. But right after that, in gap 5, she uses the word confess. Boom, we're immediately back to an affirmative performative. So we obey Rule D, keep it simple with I confess, and we cross out I'm confessing. Okay. Let's meticulously apply our systematic steps to gap 6. Step 1, spot the mental state. It's the word consider. Step 2, apply Rule C. We've got to ask ourselves, is she stating a permanent fact or is she actively thinking about something? Well, based on the context, she is actively, carefully thinking about buying a car to make her commute easier. Therefore, we completely eliminate the simple I consider and choose the active, continuous I'm considering. In Gap 7, Martina asks Aunt Mara about her new living situation in a village. Because it's a relatively new, developing situation for Aunt Mara, we apply the continuous to emphasize that temporary novelty. How are you finding living in a village? We cross out do you find. However, in Gap 8, she says, I know how difficult it is. The verb know is one of the most stubborn mental state verbs in the entire English language. It represents a permanent fact hardwired right into your brain. Therefore, we strictly eliminate I'm knowing and stick with the definitive, simple, I know. Let's finish this email strong. Gap 9 features a negative performative, don't guarantee, versus I'm not guaranteeing. Just like we saw back in Gap 3, our trusty loophole allows both negative options to stay completely valid. But Gap 10 is her final affirmative sign-off. She's actively performing the act of promising simply by writing the word. So we firmly cross out I'm promising and leave the powerful, simple present statement, I promise to find time. And with that, the email is successfully rescued. And this brilliantly illustrates why understanding the deep underlying personalities of verbs is so remarkably powerful. It's not just about passing a grammar test. It's about making your communication exact, natural, and highly effective. Knowing precisely when to freeze time with a state verb or how to perform an action literally just by saying a word changes the fundamental way you construct a sentence. So I'll leave you with this. Which of these grammar rules surprised you the most today? And how are you going to use it to perfect your next important email? Keep investigating, keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next explainer.